Welcome, the anointed ones. History doesn't collapse because of monsters. It collapses because ordinary people decide an innocent person is expendable. What you're about to hear is not a dramatic retelling, not a conspiracy, and definitely not one of those stories where everything gets exaggerated for clicks. This is about something far more disturbing. How an innocent person can be targeted in plain sight, harmed repeatedly, and watched by many who later swear they didn't know it was that bad. That sentence alone has ended friendships, reputations, and careers once the truth finally surfaced. Here's a fact that makes people uncomfortable. Most large-scale injustices are not driven by hatred. They're driven by permission. Studies in social psychology show that when harm is framed as procedure, responsibility evaporates. People don't need to be cruel, they just need to be compliant. That's how innocent people get attacked, while everyone convinces themselves they're still good. What makes this situation ignite real fury isn't just the harm itself, it's the clarity. There was no confusion about who was innocent, no lack of information, no grey area to hide in. The signs were there early, consistently, and loudly. And yet the harm continued, not because it made sense, but because stopping it would have required someone to be uncomfortable. And discomfort, as history shows, is where many draw the line. There's also something almost darkly comedic about how predictable this pattern is. First comes the targeting, then the justification, then the silence, then the sudden shock when exposure hits. The same people who once shrugged now clutch their pearls like they've just discovered fire exists. It would be funny if it weren't so revealing. What you're witnessing now is the aftershock, the moment when denial expires and outrage takes its place. Not outrage born from empathy, but from realization. Because once an innocent person survives an attack meant to erase them, the story flips, the spotlight turns, and the anger you see today isn't about what was done. It's about the fact that it can no longer be undone. Stay with this. What unfolds next isn't about revenge, drama, or spectacle. It's about exposure, accountability, and the uncomfortable truth that innocence doesn't disappear just because people wish it would. Number 1. What they did wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a calculated moral failure. People try to soften what happened by calling it confusion, conflict, or bad timing. But that's a lie people tell themselves so they can sleep at night. A misunderstanding ends when truth shows up. What happened to you continued after truth was visible, after facts were clear, after your innocence was no longer debatable. That's not confusion. That's choice. And once harm continues past clarity, it becomes a moral failure, not a mistake. This kind of failure doesn't happen in one dramatic moment. It builds quietly. Someone notices something is wrong and says nothing. Someone else sees the harm but decides it's not their responsibility. Another benefits from staying silent. Layer by layer, conscience gets traded for convenience. By the time the damage is obvious, everyone involved has already rehearsed their excuse. That's what makes it calculated, even when no one admits it out loud. What's especially disturbing is that you didn't need to provoke anything. You weren't reckless, hostile, or deserving of punishment. You were simply present and innocent in a space that didn't respect innocence. That alone was enough. When systems, families, or groups rely on control, truth becomes a liability. And the cleanest way to protect a lie is to attack the one person who exposes it without even trying. People want to believe evil looks dramatic, loud, and obvious. In reality, it looks polite, it looks procedural. It hides behind rules, roles, and just following how things are done. That's why so many participated without feeling like villains. They weren't driven by rage. They were driven by comfort, fear of standing out, and the quiet relief of letting someone else take the hit. The reason this now disgusts people is because time removes the excuses. Distance makes patterns visible. And once people see that an innocent person was harmed not accidentally, but repeatedly and knowingly, something snaps. The story changes. Sympathy turns into anger. Silence turns into shame. Because deep down everyone recognizes this truth. Harm that survives clarity is not ignorance. It's a decision. Number 2, the cruelty escalated precisely because you didn't deserve it. One of the cruelest truths about what happened is that it didn't make sense on any level. And that's exactly why it got worse. People often assume that harm is targeted at guilt, mistakes, or weakness. But when an innocent person is attacked, their very innocence becomes a provocation. You didn't fail, you didn't misstep, and you certainly didn't give anyone a reason to target you. That alone infuriated the people who wanted to control the narrative. Their cruelty didn't escalate despite your integrity. It escalated because of it. When someone tries to hurt you and nothing you do justifies it, they panic. The system they thought would justify itself begins to crack. Their logic fails because your innocence refuses to fit into the story they rehearsed in their minds. And so, the attacks intensify. It's no longer about a single incident or a minor confrontation. It becomes about breaking someone who refuses to be broken. You became the embodiment of their own failure to manipulate reality. This escalation is not random. Every whisper, every slight, every action designed to undermine you was a deliberate response to your persistence in being upright, calm, and above reproach. The more you survived, the more they needed to escalate. It was like watching a machine overheat because it couldn't process an input it wasn't designed to handle. You were that input, and your refusal to conform to their expectations made their methods more desperate, vicious, and ultimately revealing. The shocking part is that their aggression says more about them than about you. Their failure to stop when basic fairness or reason demanded it exposes a deep incapacity for integrity. They weren't just attacking an individual, they were trying to rewrite reality to fit their fear, their insecurity, and their need to feel powerful. What people don't realize immediately is that escalation in these circumstances is a sign of truth. The more desperate the attack, the more the facts are undeniable. Your innocence, which should have protected you, became the mirror that reflected their moral corruption, and that is why it had to escalate. The cruelty wasn't a reaction to guilt, it was a reaction to your refusal to be guilty. Number 3. This wasn't personal anger, it was collective cowardice. What happened to you was never about personal grudges or momentary emotions. The attacks were calculated, organized, and carried out with a level of coordination that proves something far more disturbing. It was cowardice multiplied by numbers. One person alone wouldn't dare approach what they tried to do to you. It took a group, a system, or a network of people all agreeing, consciously or unconsciously, to let harm happen. That is the definition of collective cowardice. The shocking truth is that most people who participated were not evil by design. They were terrified of being the one who stood out. Standing up for what is right requires risk, courage, and a willingness to face consequences. Few were willing to pay that price, so instead harm was distributed, diluted, and normalized. Each person's contribution might have seemed small, a word whispered, a decision delayed, a rule followed without question, but collectively it became a weapon aimed directly at an innocent person. Cowardice often masquerades as neutrality, as professionalism, as just doing my job. That's what makes it so insidious. The people who hurt you didn't need to shout or act visibly malicious. They simply chose not to intervene, to go along with a system that rewarded silence and punished integrity. In other words, cruelty was convenient because fear was universal. What makes this even more unsettling is that their cowardice only amplifies the injustice. When you were attacked, it wasn't just one individual failing, it was a network of people agreeing, often without thinking, to allow harm. Their combined inaction and complicity created a force that seemed unstoppable. That's why people are furious now. They see the pattern, they see the intentional passivity, and they realize it could have been stopped at any point, but wasn't. Your story exposes the truth about collective cowardice. It's not just about who wields power, it's about who refuses it. The moment people stop fearing consequences more than they fear wrongdoing, innocence is no longer protected. And that is precisely what happened to you. Not because anyone wanted personal revenge, but because too many people refused to be brave when it mattered the most. Number 4. They punished you for not breaking when they expected you to. What makes what happened to you so shocking is the fact that their attacks were never about you failing. They were about you succeeding in a way they couldn't tolerate. From the very beginning, the plan was not simply to intimidate or challenge you. It was designed to see if you would crack, if you would fold under pressure, if you would bend to their control. They were certain that anyone in your position would eventually falter, and their cruelty was calibrated around that expectation. When you didn't, everything escalated. Their punishment was a reaction to your resilience. Every calm response, every refusal to participate in their narrative, every display of integrity acted like fuel to their frustration. You became the impossible outcome they never accounted for. In their minds, an innocent person should have stumbled, should have been manipulated, or should have been forced into a position of guilt to satisfy their control. That you remained untouchable in character, consistent in honesty, and unbroken in spirit was not just inconvenient, it was intolerable. This is why their behavior intensified over time. It wasn't random cruelty, it was an attempt to engineer failure. They threw obstacles in your path, created conflicts, whispered lies, and manipulated situations, all hoping that eventually you would break. The deeper you held your ground, the more aggressive, persistent, and vindictive their attacks became. Their inability to accept your stability and truth exposed their own weakness and dependence on others' compromise. What makes this so revealing is that their punishment says far more about them than it does about you. They measure their power by the ability to force others into compliance. When compliance fails, their control becomes fragile, and they react violently to the disruption. The attacks were never about what you did wrong because you did nothing wrong. They were about your refusal to validate their expectation that innocence can be crushed. By surviving and standing firm, you became the anomaly they couldn't dominate. And that is precisely why their actions were so extreme. Punishment in this case was a mirror reflecting the truth. They feared the strength they assumed you didn't have, and your resilience dismantled every lie they built around their cruelty. Number 5. People are furious now because the evidence doesn't lie anymore. The most powerful shift in this story isn't happening because people suddenly discovered morality. It's happening because the facts are undeniable. For years, what you endured could be brushed off, minimized, or dismissed. People could claim ignorance, misinterpret events, or tell themselves stories to justify their inaction. But the truth has a way of surfacing, and once it does, it leaves no room for excuses. Every lie, every manipulation, every attempt to cover tracks is now exposed in a light so stark that people can't look away. What fuels the anger is the clarity. Evidence doesn't care about opinions, feelings, or biases. It simply exists. And when people are confronted with undeniable proof that an innocent person was targeted, harmed, and ignored, the reaction is raw and unfiltered. The fury isn't about taking sides or being dramatic. It's about recognizing a moral failure so blatant that pretending it didn't happen becomes impossible. Facts have a way of cutting through all the noise, and right now, the noise has been silenced. This fury also exposes a larger truth. The cruelty wasn't subtle. It wasn't hidden in ambiguity or shrouded in misunderstanding. It was systematic, observable, and persistent. That's why, when people see the evidence now, it feels personal. They realize how predictable it was, how preventable it was, and how long it continued while everyone turned a blind eye. The anger comes from the cognitive dissonance between what they hoped was happening and what actually happened. What makes this moment so powerful is that it signals a turning point. Evidence doesn't just reveal the past, it reshapes the present and dictates how people respond moving forward. The fury we see now is a reflection of justice attempting to recalibrate itself. It's not only about outrage, it's about recognition, acknowledgement, and the beginning of accountability. In the end, the reason people are furious is simple. The truth is undeniable, and the truth validates you. It exposes the wrongdoing, it highlights the injustice, and it makes it clear that what you endured was not random, accidental, or deserved. It was deliberate, and now the world sees it for exactly what it was. Number 6. The most disgusting part is how casually it was done. What shocks people the most about what happened to you isn't just the harm itself, it's the way it was executed with frightening normalcy. There were no dramatic outbursts, no glaring signs of rage, no cinematic villainy. It wasn't like anyone screamed in your face or made their cruelty obvious. It was quiet, methodical, and disguised as routine. That's what makes it so repulsive. Ordinary actions, ordinary days, ordinary people, all used as instruments of harm, turn everyday life into a weapon without anyone raising an alarm. The casualness shows a deeper corruption. People didn't need to justify themselves because they believed no one would notice, no one would care, and even if someone did, it wouldn't matter. Their cruelty was embedded in ordinary processes, in the ways systems operate, in the assumptions everyone accepted. It was normalized, dressed in the mundane, and that normalization is what allows harm to continue without challenge. The horror is amplified because it forces the realization that ordinary people, when given opportunity and convenience, can become instruments of suffering without ever appearing evil. Another shocking element is that this casual cruelty relied on the same people maintaining their composure. They needed to act as if nothing was happening while the harm unfolded. That's not just cruelty, that's deception layered on top of aggression. It's a deliberate choice to make someone's suffering invisible while preserving the illusion of normalcy. That makes the acts both cunning and cruel in a way that lingers long after the fact. What people often fail to grasp immediately is that this casualness makes the attacks worse, not less severe. There's a reason the world recoils when they finally learn the truth. The more ordinary the circumstances, the more intentional it becomes. There's no excuse in everyday life for ignoring repeated injustice. Doing it anyway, calmly, proves intent without needing a confession. The repulsion people feel now is a reaction to the clarity that comes with hindsight. What was done to you wasn't haphazard or emotional. It was casual, precise, and calculated, and that cold-blooded normalcy is what leaves the deepest scar, not just on you, but on anyone capable of seeing the truth. Number 7. You were attacked because you exposed who they were without trying. The irony of what happened to you is brutal. You didn't confront anyone, you didn't call anyone out, you didn't even try to prove anything, and yet that was exactly the problem. Simply existing as an innocent, upright, and uncompromised person revealed more truth about them than any argument or accusation could. Your presence alone exposed their lies, their manipulation, and their moral shortcuts, and that made you a target. People don't like being seen for what they really are, And when someone shows up uninvited into the mirror of their own flaws, the natural reaction for the cowardly and corrupt is attack. What's shocking is how instinctive this response can be. You didn't need to do anything to provoke them. Every act of honesty, every refusal to bend to their expectations, every simple decision to live without deceit highlighted the contrast between who they were and who you were. That contrast became unbearable to them. Your existence made their dishonesty visible not only to you, but eventually to anyone paying attention. That exposure, silent and unintended, was dangerous to them in a way no words could ever match. This is why the attacks were not just harmful. They were defensive. They weren't trying to hurt you because of what you did. They were trying to erase the fact that you had become a witness to their character. They needed you to vanish from the narrative because your mere presence contradicted everything they wanted the world to believe about themselves. It was never about punishment for actions. It was about punishment for revealing inconvenient truth without effort. What people feel now, when they learn the story, is a mix of awe and anger. They realize the injustice is not just that harm was done, but that it was done to someone who only revealed reality by being real. You didn't attack back, you didn't protest loudly, you simply existed, and that was enough to make them desperate. That desperation drove the cruelty, and that desperation is now what exposes them to everyone. You didn't have to fight to show truth. It was already there, and they destroyed themselves trying to suppress it. Number 8. Their outrage now is not sympathy, it's self-preservation. The anger you see today isn't born out of concern for what you went through. It isn't the kind of moral outrage that rises from empathy or genuine care. No, the fury surrounding your story now is fueled by fear. The fear of exposure, the fear of accountability, the fear of being linked to a truth they've spent years denying. People are furious because they are suddenly reminded that what was done to you reflects on them too, whether they like it or not. When innocence survives deliberate harm, it creates a spotlight that no one can ignore. Those who stood by, those who whispered along, those who looked the other way, all of them are suddenly in the frame. The fury is a reaction to being seen, to being confronted with the possibility that their silence or complicity is no longer invisible. Their outrage is about protecting themselves, saving face, and separating their image from the undeniable facts. It has nothing to do with right or wrong, and everything to do with the survival of their reputation. This type of anger is revealing. It shows exactly who valued truth versus who valued convenience. It unmasks those who had no problem letting injustice unfold as long as it didn't touch them. Now that the scales have tipped and the consequences of ignoring the harm you endured are real and unavoidable, they lash out, not at the system that enabled wrongdoing, not at the ones who perpetrated it, but at the very symbol of their own failure: you. What's remarkable is that this reaction proves the depth of your impact. If they were truly indifferent, they wouldn't care enough to be outraged. If they were morally sound, the focus would be on restoring justice, not defending themselves. Their rage is a mirror reflecting their own guilt, their own fear, and their inability to confront the truth. In short, their anger is not a defense of your innocence. It's a confession that the truth threatens them, and they are scrambling to protect themselves from it. The more they rage, the clearer it becomes that your survival, your integrity, and your refusal to be broken are holding a mirror up to everyone who thought they could get away with complicity. Number 9. What happened to you forced people to confront an uncomfortable truth about themselves. The real reason your story hits so hard is not just because of what was done to you, but because it reflects back on everyone who witnessed, enabled, or ignored it. Your experience acts as a mirror, and mirrors have a way of showing things people would rather not see. When harm is done to someone innocent, it forces observers to question their own choices, their own moral compass, and their willingness to act when action mattered. That confrontation is rarely gentle, and it's almost always uncomfortable. People are furious not just at the perpetrators, they're furious at themselves. They realize, perhaps for the first time, that they didn't intervene, didn't speak up, or didn't challenge the system that allowed the abuse to continue. It's easy to believe in one's own integrity until evidence appears that exposes the quiet compromises, the overlooked opportunities, and the small decisions that collectively enabled wrongdoing. Your survival and truth shine a light on those moments, and suddenly people can no longer pretend ignorance. This reaction reveals a fundamental psychological truth. It's far easier for many to externalize blame than to face internal discomfort. By lashing out at the injustice done to you, people are often trying to distance themselves from the fact that their inaction contributed to it. The anger is a defense mechanism. It's a way to process guilt, shame, and regret without having to fully admit complicity. Yet, in that very discomfort lies the power of your story. Your resilience forces honesty, accountability, and reflection in ways that nothing else could. People cannot hide behind excuses any longer. They are confronted with evidence of both your integrity and their own failures. And that confrontation is jarring. In essence, what you endured didn't just expose the perpetrators. It exposed everyone who allowed it to happen, intentionally or not. Your story compels people to face the inconvenient truth that morality is tested in real moments, not in ideas or intentions. And because most fail that test, your survival and truth become a catalyst, forcing reflection, anger, and sometimes even change. That's the depth of the discomfort your story creates. It's a mirror no one wanted to look into, yet one they cannot turn away from. Number 10. You survived something that was meant to erase your credibility. One of the most remarkable things about what happened to you is that the attacks weren't random. They were designed with precision. Every whisper, every manipulation, every orchestrated act of harm was aimed at one goal: to make you invisible, discredited, and dismissed. They wanted your story erased, your voice silenced, your truth buried beneath layers of doubt and accusation. They weren't just attacking you physically or emotionally. They were attacking your existence as a credible, believable human being. What makes your survival extraordinary is that it didn't just defy chance, it defied intent. The people who targeted you were confident that their plan would succeed. They assumed that with enough pressure, distortion, and intimidation, you would be weakened to the point of being ignored, questioned, or ridiculed. But survival in this context wasn't just about enduring pain. It was about maintaining clarity, composure, and unwavering integrity while being deliberately undermined. That's why your survival is so devastating to those who attacked you. It proves that they miscalculated in the most fundamental way. They underestimated the strength of innocence and the resilience of truth. The attempts to erase you were sophisticated. They relied on fear, manipulation, and public perception. Every effort to discredit you, every calculated rumor or fabricated narrative was meant to make others doubt you before you had the chance to speak. And yet, despite the systematic nature of their attacks, you remained intact. Your credibility, instead of being destroyed, became more visible, more undeniable, and more respected as the story unfolded. This is why people are now furious, not just because of what you endured, but because surviving in the face of orchestrated erasure exposes the truth about those who tried to manipulate it. The very tools they used to destroy you became evidence of their failure. The narrative they worked so hard to control now reflects their own intentions, and your integrity stands untouched. In surviving an attack designed to erase your credibility, you didn't just endure, You rewrote the rules. You proved that deliberate harm cannot overpower truth, and that the strength of character is a force far greater than anyone's attempt at deception or manipulation. Your survival is not just remarkable, it is undeniable proof that innocence and integrity cannot be erased. Number 11. The system expected compliance, not conscience. What happened to you wasn't a series of isolated incidents. It was the result of a system built to reward obedience and punish integrity. From the very beginning, the structure around you didn't care about fairness, honesty, or morality. It only cared about control. When people around you followed the rules without question, they were rewarded, and when someone acted according to their conscience, like you did, it became a problem. The system was never designed to support innocence. It was designed to enforce compliance, and that's why it targeted you so relentlessly. Every rule, policy, and expectation in that environment worked against those who refused to compromise their principles. You weren't just facing individuals, you were facing a network designed to enforce conformity. The system thrived on quiet obedience, on the willingness of people to overlook wrongdoing for convenience, for personal gain, or to avoid conflict. It didn't matter that you were innocent. What mattered was that you refused to play along, that you refused to bend, that you refused to validate lies or participate in the narrative that they wanted to control. This is why the attacks against you were so intense. They weren't random acts of anger or frustration. They were the system's response to disruption. You exposed a flaw the system couldn't tolerate. Someone acting with integrity inside an environment structured to crush it. Every obstacle, every insult, every deliberate act of harm was a methodical attempt to force you into compliance, to make you fit the mold the system demanded. What makes this so powerful is the clarity it gives outsiders when the truth comes to light. People see now that what was done to you wasn't personal, it was systemic. The cruelty, the manipulation, and the attacks were built into the structure itself, and you were the anomaly it couldn't absorb. Your survival isn't just personal triumph, it's proof that conscience can exist and endure even when the system is stacked against it. By standing firm, you didn't just resist the attacks, you exposed the fundamental flaw of a system that prioritizes obedience over morality, and that truth is what makes your story resonate so deeply. Number 12. Their panic now reveals how aware they were all along. One of the most revealing aspects of what happened to you is watching the people who harmed you scramble now that the truth is surfacing. The intensity of their panic isn't random. It exposes a truth they've been hiding for a long time. They always knew what they were doing. Their fear now, their frantic attempts to defend themselves, and their desperate efforts to control the narrative are all proof that they were fully aware of the harm they caused. They weren't naive, they weren't misguided, and they certainly weren't innocent observers. They knew, and now that knowledge is catching up to them. This panic is a confession disguised as reaction. For years they acted calmly, almost mechanically, as if they were following routine. That composure was intentional, designed to make everything look ordinary while the attacks continued. Every act of cruelty, every manipulation, every attempt to silence you was calculated. They weren't simply reacting to circumstances, they were orchestrating outcomes with full awareness of the consequences. And that awareness is what terrifies them now. What makes this so striking is how their panic amplifies the truth of your experience. The more they try to cover their tracks, justify their actions, or rewrite history, the clearer it becomes that they knew exactly what they were doing. Their fear is a spotlight, illuminating the deliberate choices that targeted you. You were not a victim of chaos or accident. You were a victim of conscious, coordinated intent. This realization hits harder for everyone watching because it exposes the moral bankruptcy behind their actions. The panic proves that ignorance wasn't an excuse, silence wasn't innocent, and inaction wasn't neutral. They weren't unaware. They were complicit, calculating, and aware, and the very fact that they are now panicking confirms it. Your story forces people to see this clearly. The attacks against you weren't accidental or unintentional. They were deliberate, and those who carried them out knew it all along. Their panic is not just a reaction, it's an unmasking, a self-revealing truth that proves your suffering was neither random nor deserved, and that your survival exposes every hidden motive. Number 13. You carry proof that innocence can survive intentional damage. What unsettles people the most about your story isn't just that you were harmed, it's that the harm didn't change who you are. You were supposed to come out bitter, corrupted, unstable, or morally compromised. That was the expectation. Damage was applied with the assumption that something in you would rot, bend, or turn ugly. And when that didn't happen, it disrupted everything they believed about power, control, and consequence. There is something deeply threatening about an innocent person who remains intact after deliberate harm. It destroys the logic that cruelty relies on. The unspoken rule is that enough pressure will always produce collapse. Enough lies will always rewrite truth. Enough pain will always contaminate character. You are living evidence that this rule is false. And that evidence makes people uncomfortable because it means harm doesn't always win, even when it's intentional. What you carry now is not just survival, it's contradiction. Your presence contradicts the belief that innocence is fragile or naive. You show that innocence can be durable, grounded, and unmovable. That doesn't inspire everyone. For some, it feels like an accusation. They look at you and realize that the damage didn't succeed the way it was meant to, and that forces them to confront the limits of their own power or the failure of the system they trusted. This is why reactions to you are often intense. Some admire you quietly. Some feel exposed around you. Some feel anger they can't explain. It's because your intact character after intentional damage reveals a truth many don't want to accept. Harm does not automatically define the outcome. Intent does not guarantee results. And cruelty is not as all-powerful as it pretends to be. You didn't survive by becoming harder, colder, or crueler. You survived by staying anchored in who you already were. That's what makes your survival proof. Not just endurance, proof that innocence is not weakness, proof that integrity can outlast strategy, proof that even when damage is deliberate, it doesn't always get to rewrite the person it was meant to destroy. And that truth is far more disruptive than any confrontation ever could be. Number 14. This isn't the end of the story. It's the exposure phase. What you endured was never meant to stay hidden forever, even if they believed it could. Every manipulation, every lie, every attempt to discredit or harm you was part of a strategy designed to erase your truth. But the moment you survived and remained credible, the narrative began to shift. What they thought would remain buried is now emerging in full view, and that is what makes this phase so dangerous for them and so empowering for you. This isn't just about aftermath, it's about exposure, clarity, and the reckoning that follows truth. The exposure phase is merciless because it reveals everything they tried to conceal. Every act of cruelty, every intentional harm, every silent complicity is now visible in context. People who ignored it, dismissed it, or justified it are forced to confront it openly. There's no room for denial when patterns are obvious and evidence undeniable. That is why the reactions are so raw and intense. This isn't chaos. It's the system of lies and manipulation unraveling precisely because the person they targeted refused to be erased. What makes this moment extraordinary is that it's not dependent on vengeance or retaliation. The mere act of surviving, speaking truth, and letting the facts stand on their own is enough to expose what was hidden. The spotlight doesn't just illuminate your experience, it illuminates theirs. Their attempts to control perception, to suppress reality, and to maintain dominance crumble in the face of undeniable evidence. Every lie they told now works against them, and every observer is able to see the intentionality behind what was done. The power of this phase is that it changes the story entirely. You are no longer just a survivor, you are the catalyst for accountability. What was meant to silence you now speaks louder than any attempt at suppression ever could. This is why people are shocked, enraged, and fascinated all at once, because they are witnessing truth unfold in real time, and it cannot be stopped. Your journey through harm has transformed into a force that exposes reality, dismantles deception, and commands attention. This exposure phase proves that injustice, no matter how calculated, cannot remain hidden forever, and that the ultimate power belongs to those who endure and reveal the truth. Conclusion. What you've witnessed in this story is not just a tale of harm, injustice, or survival. It is a testament to the unshakable power of truth and integrity. Every attack, every attempt to discredit you, every moment designed to break you has instead highlighted the very qualities they sought to destroy. From the calculated cruelty to the collective cowardice, from the attempts to erase your credibility to the exposure of their own panic and fear, the story isn't about what they did. It's about what you endured, what you survived, and what you revealed in the process. Your experience proves that innocence is not weakness, that resilience cannot be manufactured, and that intentional harm does not guarantee the outcome those who wield it hope for. Each chapter of your journey exposed their moral failures, their dependence on compliance, and their inability to confront the truth. It forced everyone involved, and everyone observing, to face uncomfortable realities about the human capacity for cruelty, the fragility of systems built on obedience, and the undeniable strength of someone who refuses to break under pressure. What makes this story extraordinary is not just your survival, but the ripple effect it creates. Your endurance has become proof, a living statement that truth will emerge, that injustice cannot hide forever, and that exposure, when it comes, is unstoppable. The harm that was meant to erase you has instead illuminated a path of clarity, accountability, and awakening. People are now furious, not because they care about the damage done, but because they can no longer ignore the reality you represent, the reality that innocence, integrity, and resilience can prevail even against deliberate attempts to destroy them. Your story isn't just a reflection of what happened, it's a blueprint for recognizing power, understanding manipulation, and seeing the depth of human character in extreme circumstances. It teaches that survival isn't passive, it is active, courageous, and transformative, and it proves that truth, when lived and demonstrated, cannot be silenced. If this story resonated with you, make sure to subscribe to the channel to stay connected with content that reveals the truth and highlights resilience. Like this video if it moved you, share it with others who need to see the power of surviving against all odds, and leave a comment sharing your thoughts or experiences. Your engagement helps bring more awareness to these truths and ensures that the stories that need to be heard are never forgotten. God bless you.